that unforgettable day, September 15th, 1963. You were only 15 years old, and yet you experienced something so tragic. Could you go back to that moment and tell us exactly how you felt when you looked around as you stood in the church, and after that when you discovered that your 4 friends had been killed in the bombing?
Initially, looking around the church, I could see the rubble, the debris. It wasn't clear to me right away what had happened. It wasn't until I got home that the full impact of what had happened was clear to me. And then Carol Robertson's mother called my mom looking for Carol, and she asked if I was home. And I think many of the parents thought that their children had been taken to safety by someone else. But at 4 o'clock, when we received a call telling us that my friends had never made it out of the bathroom, the impact was more than I can describe to you. It was as though I was hit by a ton of bricks, as people say. I was quiet, I think, the rest of the evening trying to process what had just happened. We had had bombings to take place all over Birmingham, but this was the first time that people had actually died. And it was very unreal. You know, it was almost as though it were an unbelievable nightmare, something that I just couldn't process. It was very difficult to understand it as a child.
Now, you had actually just gone into the bathroom, which is where your 4 friends were killed.
I didn't actually go in. I paused at the doorway. I was holding the reports, and I stood in the doorway and said good morning and just kind of looked at what they were doing. They were combing hair and just talking. And our church office at that time was at the top of the steps. Glancing at the clock, I said, oops, and ran on up the steps. And when I reached the top of the steps, the phone was ringing, but the woman that I worked for, she was the church clerk, was not there. And when I answered the call, I knew it was a male caller, but I didn't think that to myself. You know, I say the male caller on the other end said 3 minutes. We, as children, had not been privy to this type of information. Adults, the habit of adults was that they didn't tell children things that frightened them or tell them things that really involved really deep racial matters.
So what did you think the 3 minutes meant at that moment?
You know, I didn't have very long to think about it. I was puzzled, but I had about 15 steps or 15 seconds to think about it. And I just know that because we've counted the steps. But when I took those steps, about the 15th step was when the bomb exploded.
When we come back, how the blast that didn't kill Carolyn made her stronger. Welcome back. Carolyn McKinstry was only 15 years old when a bomb exploded at her church, killing 4 of her young friends. She survived, but in many ways, her life ended that day. Here's part 2 of our interview.
Let me ask you, you love to go to church. You look forward to Sunday mornings, but on the other side of the bombing, you've witnessed it, you were there, you experienced it, you had lost your friends. How did the bombing actually change you and change your life?
Well, probably for the first 20 years after the bombing, I was in very much a deep depression at a time when we didn't call it depression. I'm not sure that I ever heard that word during those years. I just knew that I wasn't happy, I felt sad. I knew that certain things frightened me, loud noises. I had a rash on my hands that stayed. I had a terrible time sleeping most all of the time. And I found myself in college even more depressed, and I have what I call a secret box at home. But when I was in college, I would write a lot. And I found that a lot of times when I would write, I felt better. But the things that I wrote are, when I read them today, I'm almost shocked sometimes when I read. I talked a lot about death, wishing I was dead, wondering why I was here.
So you had what we call survivor's guilt.
I think I had survivor's guilt too. Yeah, I wondered, you know, it almost felt that it would have hurt less if I'd gone with them than staying behind.
Earlier, I asked you a question. I said, how did you feel, you know, at that very moment on September 15th, 1963? Well, my question for you now is, how do you feel today when you think about the bombing, when you think about your 4 friends, when you think about the men who took their lives? How do you feel today?
I feel wonderful. I feel blessed. And I'll go back to the sermon, the eulogy that Dr. King gave when the girls were killed. One of the things that he said was, the blood of these girls may well serve as a redemptive force, not only for Birmingham, but for the rest of the nation and the world. And in fact, when we look around at the things that changed after September 15th, the softening of hearts. The children had marched in the streets prior to that bombing, but after the bombing, there was a tremendous softening of hearts. Sympathy poured from all over the world. And in fact, that bombing has been referred to as the bomb that was heard around the world. And Birmingham had to stop and take a long, hard look at itself. I just feel that the redemption has come as a result of their deaths, because I understand that God did not allow this to be for nothing. They did not die in vain. They did serve as a redemptive force, and we continue to see that redemption, not just in our country, but in our world.
This is my last question for you. There are still circumstances and situations in our world today. We talked about 1963, but now we're in 2011, where there are political conflicts and religious conflicts and all of these things, and people are fighting with each other. What would your message be to someone who's in a similar situation? They've seen devastation, they've seen death, they've seen the bombings and things like that. What would your message be to that person today?
Well, I might say 2 things to them. The first is that God is a God of history, and it is through that history that we're able to see the mistakes that were made. We don't have to walk blindly in this journey on earth. He gives us every opportunity to see the mistakes that were made and to not make those mistakes. The second thing I would say is that if a man says he loves God and not his brother, then he's fooling himself. Can a man love God and hate his brother? God says no. He can't love me and hate his brother. We need to focus more on the love aspect of relationships. And we are talking about the agape type of love, the unconditional type of love, where we understand that by one God we were all created. And ultimately, we are sisters and brothers in this journey on this earth. We have to also remember, Desmond Tutu had written the book, No Love, No Future Without Forgiveness. What else is there if we don't learn to forgive? We can just all expect the world to continue to be in turmoil and chaos. Dr. King asked the question in a different way. He said, where do we go from here? Chaos or community? We can choose to love and live in community, or we can choose chaos and self-destruct.